Good evening, friends, and welcome to this Church Times webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Adrian Dorber, the Dean of Lichfield, and I'm Chair of the Association of English Cathedrals. As all the Church regroups, readjusts, and finds new direction and inspiration after these long, weary months of pandemic, English Cathedrals, with, I hope, representatives from Wales and Ireland, will be taking time to look at the changed landscape caused by COVID and Brexit. The National Cathedrals Conference, different country, different church, takes place this coming May in Newcastle from the 16th to the 19th of May. And its aim is to help cathedrals think about how they serve their communities and regions and what opportunities God is actually putting our way by virtue of the times and the circumstances we're living through. This evening's webinar is something of a curtain raiser for the whole conference. Now, it is the case that in Europe and North America, we know there's been a very dramatic falling away from religious practice and affiliation. It's caused churches across the denominational spectrum to reorganize, to regroup and adapt. Yet no matter how streamlined the organization, the fundamental questions of our plausibility and authenticity remain. How well do we do what we say we're here for? Whose actual interests do we serve? How do we speak and live out the Christian gospel in a culture that is alienated from religion, but massively anxious about the future survival of the planet, at odds about human dignity, and confronted by the dehumanizing disparity between rich and poor, and the increasing number of people feeling lonely, marginalized, and hopeless? It's perhaps Pope Francis's gift to the whole church, not just his own, that he sets out in his social encyclical systematically a pattern for discipleship in today's world. It's a pattern of Christ-likeness for our times. And surveying the crises that confront us, he urges us to seek out the people and communities on the margins in order to understand and hear them and respond with appropriate action. And it's in the determination to see and hear what life is like on the margins that we perceive the word of Christ for us today. This approach has been readily and enthusiastically paralleled by the action and teaching of our own archbishops. It's good that all the saints speak with the same voice. So in meeting and serving a wounded planet and wounded humanity, the church will be led to find its deepest renewal. Doing the good news transforms us into the way of the gospel. It transforms us into the way of the good news itself. Love grows through faith and action, an ever widening and deepening movement. And it's very interesting how this typically Ignatian piece of discernment has gained so much appreciation as an astute guide for the church's future. It's biblical. It brings our times under the judgment and scrutiny of Jesus' mercy, and it builds on historic Christian experience and wisdom. It listens accurately to the pain of the world, and it urges us to act. It's very appropriate then that the 42 English cathedrals take time together to look at three big justice questions when they meet in Newcastle this May. If life in Christ means abundance and joy, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly, as Jesus says in St. John chapter 10, verse 10. What are the measures we take, the advocacy we can bring, the partnerships we can make, the vision we can forge, the welcome and hospitality we offer that enables that fullness of life to be experienced by all? So we'll be looking and trying to understand how life is for our fellow citizens, whom poverty or disability and mental and physical ill health or lack of properly paid work and poor housing send to the margins of our own society. A practical focus on our children and young people, as 1 in 3 of them lives in poverty, is a great challenge to rise to. All this stuff isn't a remote, non-urgent set of issues. It's within our communities. We live side by side with those on the margins. And next, not only is the Church committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2030, but as people of faith, do we have an idea of what makes for a flourishing world where every living thing, the ecology of our world, is held in loving and attentive trusteeship and brings blessing rather than death, extinction, and degradation? Justice for the planet is more than fairness. It is right ordering and respect based on trust and gratitude. The medium and long-term good of the environment is something that trumps short-term and short-lived economic advantage. So we've got to think about that nexus of problems, how to balance these long-term ends with the small steps we can take to get us on the right lines. And thirdly, we know we have many lessons to learn in order to become a church where people of all races and cultures are honoured, where they can lead, contribute, and flourish. So these 3 big justice questions will be the focus of our time in Newcastle. And let me end with just a few more comments about the racial justice issue, because how we include and celebrate diversity and how we listen to people of different cultures and ethnicity is going to be perhaps the test of our neighbourly welcome, our neighbourly concern, our neighbourly solicitude that our society lives well together. We have to listen very carefully to the people who find Britain inherently racist. And we have to listen, I guess, to the critique that they bring of the narratives we tell about our own history and about our own culture. But tonight, we hone in on the social justice issue. And I'm very delighted that we're joined by 2 of the conference speakers, Anne Richards and Mark Russell. Anne is part of the Church of England's Faith and Public Life Department and is based at Lambeth Palace. She's been theological consultant and advisor to many aspects of debate on spirituality, reconciliation, evangelism, and mission, and how all this relates to social action. During the pandemic, Anne has been tracking and reflecting on the national mood and the Church's response to it. I have to say, everything Anne says and writes is backed by thorough research and acute observation, and it's that breadth of honed wisdom that makes her a very compelling speaker, and I'm glad she can be with us tonight. Our second guest, Mark Russell, is the Chief Executive Officer of the Children's Society. Mark is passionately committed to the need for all children and young people to have a good start in life, free from poverty, insecurity, and hopelessness. He grew up in Northern Ireland, graduated in law, and worked for 10 years as a youth worker in cross-community work, bringing Protestant and Catholic young people together in the run-up to the Good Friday Agreement. Before joining the Children's Society, Mark was Chief Executive of the Church Army for 13 years, and Mark wants to build a coalition that will end child poverty by the year 2030, and we're delighted to hear him set out why that's a faith and justice imperative. So contributors, welcome, delighted that you can come, and we're going to ask each contributor to speak for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open everything up for some questions and maybe a bit of debate between us 3 too. So Anne, would you like to take the screen first?
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Adrian, and good evening, everybody. I was very excited to be invited to speak at the National Cathedrals Conference because I've always had in my head a remark that was made by former Archbishop Rowan Williams. And he was talking about hosting the Lambeth Conference, and he said he was just going to institute a time of silence and prayer in Canterbury Cathedral and let the building do its work. And when he said that, I always wondered what that might mean for a cathedral to do its work. I mean, you can see the obvious sense of the beauty and the grandeur of cathedrals, their history of prayer and sacrament, the sense of pilgrimage or the sacred tradition, and the witness to God in Jesus Christ through the Spirit, of course. But what about other sorts of work? And by this, I don't just mean the building. I mean the clergy, the staff, the congregation, all the wider people associated with a cathedral where it is. What would that mean to do work? Would it just be a place in community? Would it be a sensing out and reaching out to human need and embodying and voicing the social imaginary of the place where the cathedral is situated? Would it be being prophetic of what is needed in terms of transformation and change and challenge? How does any cathedral do its work in terms of all the 5 marks of mission as they work holistically together, and particularly in the multiple areas which constitute social justice? So this has always been a sort of enigma to me and a sort of interest that I've had. But to illustrate all that, I just wanted to tell you a story. And the story is about an hour, a lunch hour, that I once spent on a very ordinary, very cold day in a cathedral shop. Now, I went in there just to keep warm, basically. I was actually doing something at the cathedral at the time. And I was just loitering about the way that I tend to do. And 3 very interesting people stick in my mind who were just in the shop, passing through the shop at that time. First of all, there was a woman who was hanging around the postcards on the rack, and she was just pulling them out, having a look at them, putting them back. And I got talking to her about the postcards, but I couldn't help noticing that she kept looking over the rack through the glass screen at actually what was going on in the cathedral itself. And she eventually said to me that really she really wanted to go in and sit down and take part in one of the services, but she was too nervous. And she thought she would be out of place and maybe didn't fit in or didn't know what to say or do. And she really wanted to light one of those candles and say a prayer. She didn't know if that you had to do something, or you had to say something or ask something or pay something. So what she was going to do was just hang around in the shop, look through the glass and see what was going on, and just think about maybe participating. Maybe perhaps she could just join in a little bit. But she couldn't pluck up the courage just then, and she wasn't a practicing Christian. So that was a place where she could be, where she could see something of what was going on. In the same hour that I was there, a teenager came in and went over to the person who was serving behind the till and asked for directions to the city centre, which she gave. But he didn't actually take them and leave. He said, actually, I've just left home and I've come here. I was hoping to stay on a friend's sofa, but the friend has moved and I don't know where they've gone. So could you tell me somehow where I could get a bed for the night, where I could stay? I haven't got a lot of money and I can't go home. And the person behind the till, bless her, said, absolutely, we can deal with that. Absolutely, not a problem. I'll find you someone to talk to. And she helped him out of the shop. And I don't know what happened after that, but I am certain that that person found help. And somebody took that story seriously. And there was obviously a backstory there, which needed to be shared, and a social need that needed to be addressed. And in the same hour, again, there was another lady who was just sort of hanging around looking at various bits and pieces in the shop. And she was poring over the pens. There were a lot of souvenir pens with the name of the cathedral on the side. And she was turning those over, and I got talking to her, and she said that she wrote a lot of letters. And I said, well, I never write letters anymore. It's all email with me. It's all typing. I probably couldn't spell my own name if I tried. And she said, oh, well, you know, my son was in prison and I wrote every day and I got through a lot of pens and a lot of pencils and a lot of paper writing to my son. And I said, oh, well, that must be very difficult for you. And I hope you got to see your son on visitor days and so on. And she said, well, he came out of prison and took a drug overdose and died. And I still write to him every day. So there was a bereavement story there as well. So in the space of an hour, there was somebody who was looking for more about God, to encounter God. There was somebody who was in desperate social need. There was somebody who was bereaved and needed help to tell that story, and maybe just buying a pen was the way to get started. So all of those people have this profound need, this physical, pastoral, spiritual, and they found their way into the cathedral shop as a kind of liminal space, I think of it. And is that the cathedral doing its work? Because I think that just 1 hour in the shop actually opens up all sorts of potentials that I'm excited to examine. How can the cathedrals, their clergy and staff and congregations read the emerging situations in our diocese, in our country, in our nation, in the world, and respond? Now that brings me to thinking about, well, what does God really want for human beings? And what comes into my mind when I try to imagine what God wants so that human beings can flourish is what the missiologist Raymond Fung calls the Isaiah agenda, the Isaiah vision, which is Isaiah 65, I think is about verse 17 thereafter. And it's a wonderful picture. It's a picture of a world rewritten and made new according to God's purposes for human flourishing. It's this vision of a contented, healthy people, including the very, very young and the very, very old, who enjoy the fruits of their own work in peace. And people are housed, they have their needs met, and nothing will harm or destroy either them or the world that they live in. And such people will have enough time to examine and live fully within the reconciled relationship with their creator and the creation. And as such, they'll experience and they'll know God's blessing every single day. And I love this vision. It sounds really, really simple, but our communities, as we all know, are a long way from this on every front, on health and peace, justice, shelter, care for creation, care for children, for the elderly, economic sufficiency, and freedom from debt and service to the powerful. So when I get to the conference, one of the things that I want to develop is the idea of the ark in relation to social justice. And I'm just going to leave you with the themes that I intend to explore. And you can ask me about that if you want. But having thought about that, I just realized just how radical a concept the ark really was, and how if we applied that to our cathedrals and cathedral ministry, we might find some very interesting things coming out. And these themes are these: that the ark is called into being by God, but made by human hands. That the ark is the work of a prophetic community. It's made before the rain. That the ark is a covenant between God and human beings, and therefore has justice at its heart. And that the ark is inclusive. It's inclusive of the whole creation. The whole creation is in the ark. And the ark is both sanctuary for all that is in it, but also midwife of the new future that God leads everyone to. And the ark sends out not the leadership, but those who are best equipped, the dove and the raven. And that the ark can be repurposed when the rains recede. It hasn't finished. It has to be repurposed, had to start again. And that the ark is utterly responsive to God. Now, if those things could be applied to the way we are as Christian communities, how much could we then intentionally address urgent matters of social justice? So that's my taster for the conference, and I hope that you will join it and find out more about what I'm going to say. Thanks, Adrian.
And I'm very indebted to you for that wonderful image of the ark. And I hope that we'll have plenty of time to explore all its possibilities when we get to Newcastle, and even a bit more in the Q&A now. But let's now bring on our second contributor, Mark. And Mark, you've got 10 or more minutes if you need them, just to set out your stall.
Thank you, Adrian, and it is a real pleasure for me to be with you tonight as we look forward to the National Cathedrals Conference in Newcastle in May. And I'm looking forward to being there to talk about social justice, and in particular, what I believe to be absolutely critical, social justice for children and young people. I have the privilege of being the Chief Executive of the Children's Society, which is one of the largest children's charities in the country. We have teams of people working right across the country, serving some of the most disadvantaged young people. And our research shows that the most disadvantaged children in this country are living with up to 7 different issues in their lives. That could be poverty or abuse or neglect or exploitation or mental health issues or poor housing. Think about that. The most vulnerable young people have 7 of those things going on in their lives. Our teams are working right around the country with children facing those issues and to help them face tomorrow with resilience and with more hope and with more confidence. A number of years ago, I had the privilege of showing the late, great Desmond Tutu around a homeless project that Church Army ran in London. And he said the work of that project was really good because it was like fishing drowning people out of rivers. But it was really important to go upstream and stop them falling into that river or being pushed into that river in the first place. So the Children's Society is deeply committed to taking the learning from all that we see in the lives of the young people we serve and translating that into action to go upstream to try and prevent the young people falling into disadvantage in the first place. Our campaigns, our research, our policy, our advocacy, our public affairs is all designed to change systems, change government policy, and to promote the well-being of children. To give you an idea of the scale of what we do, in this financial year to date, we have worked directly with 25,000 young people. Our systems change work has reached 300,000 young people, and we've had over 8 million policy impacts. I couldn't be more proud of what our team have delivered through the teeth of a global pandemic. But the fact is, life is just too hard for too many children. In 2021, we published our 10th Good Childhood Report, the 10th report in a long line of reports chronicling children's well-being. This isn't experts or academics second-guessing what children are saying. The Good Childhood Report is the voice of children themselves. And this report shows that for too many children, life is just too hard. I think it's a disgrace that in one of the richest countries in the world, that children's well-being is getting worse year after year after year. At the Children's Society, we dare to believe that every child deserves a good childhood, a childhood filled with hope, where every child has a decent home and surrounded by people who love them, and that no child should be dependent on a food bank. We survey children across 10 different areas of their lives, like their family or their school or appearance or money or friendships. And when I say children's well-being is falling, what I mean is that the number of children who tell us that they are deeply unhappy in every single one of the 10 areas we question, that number has doubled from 170,000 10 years ago to 306,000 this year. Children's well-being is getting worse in this country. I passionately believe in social justice. And for me, social justice is about children's lives getting easier, not harder. Social justice is about children being happy, not sad. Social justice is about children not living in poverty or needing a food bank. Social justice is about parents not having to choose between heating their homes or feeding their children. I think it's a scandal that in Britain, 1 in 3 children in this country lives in poverty. So children's well-being matters. It's how they feel about their lives. And they're telling us in huge numbers, life is getting harder. And so the Children's Society has set a bold ambition for this decade. We are determined that by 2030, we will overturn this decline in children's well-being and set a path for growth. That by 2030, children's lives will be getting easier in this country and not harder. Every decision that we take, every pound we spend, will be focused on overturning that decline in children's well-being. Now, I'm delighted to be with you tonight. I'm delighted to be at the conference in May because I believe in cathedrals. I think cathedrals are a crossroads for their diocese and for their city. They're places with huge credibility and huge convening power. They are places that can demonstrate a prophetic vision of how the world should be. Cathedrals literally have a big presence. They're huge, but they also have a big voice. And cathedrals can be light and hope. They can point to the world that God yearns for. And I hope that this webinar and I hope that the conference will create space for conversation about how cathedrals can be at the forefront of promoting well-being for the most disadvantaged children in the country. Now, I know my Bible and I know God doesn't have favorites, but if he did, I'm pretty certain the most vulnerable children in this country would be right next to the very heart of God. So how can cathedrals promote children's well-being? How can cathedrals fight for social justice for young people? These are the questions I'll want to explore as part of my address in May. And I love what Adrian and his team are doing at Lichfield Cathedral to promote children's well-being. Then Lichfield Cathedral is a valued part of our movement, fighting for justice for young people. And I hope Adrian will share some of his heart because we're excited to journey with Lichfield Cathedral on this. And I'd love every cathedral in the country to stand with us and to say together with one voice that we believe that children's lives should be easier, not harder. That we stand with you in the Children's Society in your vision to transform children's well-being. 140 years ago, Edward Rudolph was a Sunday school teacher in Vauxhall in South London, in the Diocese of Southwark. And he was so angered by the poverty that children faced in Victorian England that he started this incredible organization. And 140 years later, we had the same passion, same conviction, and yes, same anger that children live in tough times and face injustice. For 140 years, cathedrals and parishes across the Church of England have stood alongside the Children's Society. And we can't do what we do without you. You help us raise the money that we need to do our work, whether that's through giving or Christingles. You join us in our campaigns to fight for change, campaigns like the one last year that saw a change in the law in school uniform, that thanks to the Children's Society's voice and the voices of thousands of our supporters, every family in England will see the cost of school uniform fall from next September. But finally, I am deeply proud that everything this organisation does is earthed in the voices of children themselves. And right across the country, we are working with, as I said, 25,000 young people. Young people like Taylor. Taylor's mum was in and out of mental health units throughout her life. And when she was 11, Taylor's mum was permanently sectioned. And dad wasn't around, so Taylor lived with her grandparents. Literally within weeks of moving in with her grandparents, her grandfather died. And Taylor appeared just to be living in this vortex of pain and loneliness and real grief in her heart. Life felt dark. And it wasn't long before people began to take advantage of Taylor. And she was desperate for love and affection. And she got into a relationship with a person and that relationship turned toxic. Her boyfriend was manipulative, controlling, and before she knew it, she was drinking too much and taking illegal drugs. She was missing school and sleeping all day and going on binges to numb her pain. Taylor's life was in freefall and she did not know how to stop. Taylor's life became so dark and so hopeless that she took an overdose and ended up in the same mental health unit as her mum. And whilst she was there, she learned about the Children's Society and a project we run to support young people. And Taylor visited that service and she met my colleague Gemma. And Gemma worked with Taylor over many years, helping her overcome the pain and work out how to build a better future. And Taylor said for the first time in her life, she's someone who she felt understood her and helped her. In Taylor's words, Gemma gave me hope and showed me there was light in the tunnel. Today, Taylor is 24. She's come a long way. She's chatty, she's confident, she's smiling. You'd never know from meeting her the journey she has been on. Because that's the difference it makes when somebody listens to you, believes in you, invests in you, and helps you change your life. And Taylor is different and transformed and filled with hope because of the work of the Children's Society and because of the work of all of our supporters who stand with us. That's what social justice looks like. The transformation of human lives one at a time and the transformation of the systems that trap young people in disadvantage. And I'm excited to explore more of that both in this webinar and at the conference in May. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. As always, stirring stuff. But now I would like us to pause for some questions. I think there's been plenty of stuff coming on through the chat, and our behind the scenes assistants will be putting that in front of us. Of course, always, whilst the church wants to make the right kind of statement, the right kind of noise, we need also to ensure that our house is in order. And there's a good question coming from Val Barrett, asking if we're all signed up for the Living Wage Foundation and whether we're good employers. That's a very good question. I'm afraid I haven't got the answer to you straight away. I know that the moral imperative is to do that, even in the midst of downturns and economic misfortune. And certainly our own cathedral here at Lichfield pays a living wage. I'm not saying that has to be the case for everybody. There are different circumstances and different people will want to make different cases. But we take the point that before we ever say a word to the world about how it should be well ordered, I think it behoves as well to ensure that our house is in order. Thank you. So would you like to post some more questions?
Adrian, I'm very happy to say that the Children's Society pays the living wage, and we are determined that we want to make sure that we provide as much support to our staff around the country in every way we can. We're prioritizing our team's well-being and mental health, and helping our team know where their resources are for help. But we want to make sure, and right the way through the pandemic, for our staff who were on furlough, we topped up their pay to 100% because we did not want to be giving a 20% pay cut to our staff through the pandemic. So we've tried to model and practice what we preach in terms of justice for our own team and for our own colleagues.
Yeah, I think that's been replicated in many other places too. I don't know, Anne, if you've got a view from Church House on Lambeth Palace, so to speak, on this.
Well, I mean, I agree that this is certainly something that which cathedrals should be doing, and everybody who has the wherewithal to do it should be doing. But the reality is that too many people don't receive what they need to receive. And we need to look very carefully at that, because a lot of people don't speak up. They just accept it. And unless we are proactive and intentional about making sure that people are being paid appropriately and being looked after appropriately, then these things fall through the cracks. And it worries me that that's very easy, for these things to happen. If I may, I would also like just to address a question that was in the comments as I was reading down about volunteering.
Yeah.
And it is certainly true that many of our churches and cathedrals depend on volunteers, and the health and well-being of volunteers is also something which can be quite badly overlooked in the process of caring for others. Now, I made a big case when I was talking about the need to hear the stories of people coming in and laying down their need, but the issue is who picks up that issue and runs with it, who does the caring, and do we care for the carers? Who is actually looking out for the health and mental well-being of those who give their time? Because I've heard story after story in all kinds of churches, not just cathedrals, that volunteers get overburdened and nobody says, are you okay? And just kind of assumes that because you volunteer, you can kind of take it all on your own shoulders. I think it is important to think about that if I'm talking about human flourishing for everyone, then it's not just the people in need, but those that care as well, that have to be looked out for.
Thank you. Yeah, good. I've got a question here from John Plant, or an observation really. Cathedrals can be great convening spaces. Does that link to what was said about the archimage? Both of you can have a go at that.
Well, I think one of the amazing things about cathedrals is that they are often the most open of public spaces, perhaps only the most open public space that people can access. Sometimes they're the only green space as well, and that therefore people do gravitate to them. But as I said, sometimes they need to find a liminal space, a halfway house, and sometimes cathedrals are really good at that as well, because they're big enough, large enough for you to hide. I've hidden in them myself.
That's a neat answer. Thank you. Do you want to have a go at that, Mark, as well?
I don't think I can improve on what Anne has just said.
Okay. Good. There's a teasing question here from Stephen Hilton. What happens when there are different versions of social justice? For example, the vast majority of young people have a very clear idea about what social justice looks like as it relates to LGBTIQ plus people. Yeah, right. Different conceptions of what is just has been always the case, but I think there's a particular Christian conception or a constellation of meanings about a Christian take on that. But Anne and Mark, would you like to address that?
My theology of social justice, Adrian, is earthed in John chapter 10, verse 10, which is in that Jesus yearns for people to live life in all its fullness. And allied to that is my belief that there are no spare people, there are no superfluous people, that everybody matters. And certainly as a youth worker, and certainly having led an evangelistic organization, and now as a leader of a large children's organization, I can tell you that a great deal of young people think that the Church of England is not a safe space for LGBTQ plus people. And I hope as the journey in this General Synod through the Living in Love and Faith resources move forward, I hope whatever outcome comes from that people who are LGBTQ will feel safe in the Church of England and will know that God thinks they're wonderful and awesome and loves them deeply, and that there is a place for them in the church because there's a place for them in the kingdom.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, that's a great answer, and it's partly there in the chat that comes from Paula Ward saying, "My own cathedral in Glasgow is open, inclusive, and welcoming." I'd love to see the cathedrals in England follow suit. Okay, well, I think we just take that on the chin. I do know the cathedral in Glasgow, and it is everything you say it is. I think we are in a very interesting position as the national church in England, trying to hold many different many tensions together, not only different theological perspectives and different traditions of thought, but equally, one listens very much to different generations, and different generations think that perhaps some of the traditional language and traditional thinking is beyond their comprehension now. So we've got the added complication that it can seem like a dialogue of the deaf. We are working very hard at living in love and faith, trying to understand how we can have respectful exchange on some of these very crucial questions. But it's going to be a long process. Anne, I don't know if you've got any more wisdom to offer on that.
I'm very interested in the concepts of inclusion and welcome, because we do know that all kinds of people feel unsafe in church, and unsafe in the very places where they should feel the most safe in lots of ways. But if you turn it around the other way, one of the things that I also find out from people is that any stranger, it doesn't matter who it is or where they come from or what their story is tremendously disturbing to groups that have got settled with each other. And how we actually get over that sense of, oh, there's somebody that I wasn't expecting here, and we must regroup and we must, size this person up. How we get past that sense of disturbance really interests me, because it is a profound missiological question. Yeah. And it is very problematic that all kinds of people end up feeling unsafe and unwelcome and tolerated, but really, wish that they would just go away. And somehow we have to interrogate this sense of disturbance, because to go back to what I was saying about God's vision for human flourishing, everybody lives together in peace. Nobody lives with that sense of disturbance. Well, why not? What's different? What has to happen to actually make welcome mean welcome and not just lip service?
Very good question. Very good point. We have also a question from Lloyd Cook of Stoke-on-Trent. Will the post-COVID world change our approaches to social justice? That's a nice, big, broad question for us.
I'm not sure we've worked that through yet. If I can give you an example from children and young people's perspective, one of the questions we ask young people every year is what they're worried about. And for years, but it was like family fortunes, ping the top answer for years. The top answer was the environment, that young people were profoundly concerned about the environment. Last year, the most significant issue that young people were concerned about was future pandemics, by a country mile, actually, and pushed the environment into second place. And that's because I think for young people, I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day. When I was a little boy, the distance between one Christmas and the other felt like an eternity. Whereas now that I'm nearly 50, the distance between one Christmas and another feels like 3 weeks. If you're a 10-year-old and you've had 2 years of your life living in this world, it has had such an impact on young people. Schools were closed for months on end. We lost a line of sight collectively to every child in the land. It's going to take a while to work out what the impact of the last 2 years have been, particularly in relation to young people and children. But what I hope will come out the other end of this is that we will have discovered what matters in life and what's important in life. And what's important in life is relationships with those we love. What's important in life is investing in the next generation. What's important in life is building strong communities, because it was communities that got us through. And what's also important is the people that held this country together during the pandemic were people who we pay the least money to. They were delivery drivers for DPD and Hermes. They were shelf stackers in the supermarket. We need to value people better and pay the poorest more. And when I watch the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions on telly at the weekend saying that the solution to child poverty is more people in work, I'm screaming at my television to remind her that 3 out of every 4 children living in poverty have parents in work. We need to make work pay better for the poorest in our country. So, sorry, rant over. We have to, coming out of this pandemic, do more to lift people out of poverty.
Okay. Now, it is the case that when cathedrals, pop their head above their turrets and talk about things, the rest of the church can say, oh, okay, yes, we hear you, but perhaps you get over-romanticized and perhaps claim too much for yourselves. And I understand that argument quite a bit, having been a hard-working parish priest, and that sense of we feebly struggle, they in glory shine. But I think what we're trying to explore in this conference is not more self-aggrandizement. It's to say how that esteemed position in our cities, in our dioceses, in our counties, can be used for a greater good, not simply to be more self-glorification, if it's put in those terms. So I think the times we're in are very, very interesting. And right at the start of the pandemic, commentators like Peter Hennessy were actually saying, I detect a new spirit in the land. The individualism of the past has been seen to be threadbare, that when you're up against it, like this pandemic, perhaps it's time to come together. Perhaps there is a new spirit of togetherness. And what was seen to be unhearable for many, many years, in an age of consumption and individualism, perhaps we're forgetting that. Now, that was at the start of the pandemic. I don't hear that now. But it was one of those kind of straws in the wind, one of those moments of mood that I wonder, perhaps it is for the church to capture that again and to be doing the sort of the parables of the kingdom again, where it's not seen as unhearable or impossible. So that perhaps this is what this conference is about. So I just wanted to offer a little bit of explanation to some of our critics who are quite voluble on the chat tonight, because I think you're right. You're rightly critical, and you need to be perhaps helping us to understand how the broader purposes of the church can always be displayed through cathedral ministry. Anyway, that's a bit of a sideways move. There are other questions that people want to talk about, and we've got an interesting one here from Francis Davis. NHS plan to close hospitals, anchor institutions, because in a downturn they're not going. I can't quite make out the gist of this, but it's, can anchor institutions like cathedrals, given their football and the capital mobilized and the jobs created, can they do something as the NHS does to secure social goods, not simply by what your main purpose is, but simply by being the kind of place you are in society? I hope that's done service to that very abbreviated question.
Can I just weave that question back
sure.
with the previous one in a way?
Yeah.
I want to tell you the story of the lane, which is during COVID when the churches were closed, the Christians in a particular lane got together and took it upon themselves to get more involved in neighbour care. So they were the ones going along and sort of knocking on the windows and asking elderly people if they were okay, they needed any shopping brought in, if they needed their medication collected, that sort of thing. And when it was possible to sort of meet outside, they instituted teas and coffees on the front lawn, and people could come by and have a cup of tea at a social distance and just have some kind of connection. allied to that, that group of Christians in the lane who would normally go to church together but weren't able to, were offering to pray for people, were suggesting, how people could keep their spirits up, and trying to make sure that the staff who were coming into the care home on the lane were also supported, who were having a terrible time and very worried about their residents. Now, the thing about that, what was interesting about that, was where those people who were doing the social care within the lane were getting their own spiritual support from, without being able to go to church as normal, and getting their kind of support, prayer and help from the people that they would normally seek help from. And actually, it was actually going online and making contact with cathedral services and with people from the cathedral online that was providing that spiritual support. So there was a new thing going on where they would normally have got it from their local church, but actually we're now getting it from the diocese in a different way, which was enabling them to keep going in the COVID situation. And now, as we move out of the sort of acute phase of COVID, if you like, that has become much more of a wider network for those Christians to feel that they've made friends with other people in other prayer networks, in other agencies, in other sources of support, so that actually they can do yet more neighbour care now than they could during the acute phase of the pandemic. I find that very interesting, because they've actually gone looking for support and found it in that wider way. So the cathedral has actually made more contact with the local church than through that form that it had for those people before that happened.
Yeah. I think those lessons have been replicated all over the country. Fascinating, really.
Adrian, I think there's something as well about the collective national trauma that we've been through over the last 2 years. It's almost felt like, as a nation, we're facing PTSD at the moment. And that suggests to me that there are a lot of people around the country who are carrying a great deal of pain and brokenness and loss and grief. And I suspect, whilst watching all the shenanigans in Downing Street, a great deal of anger. And they need places to process that. And frequently, cathedrals are often some of the only Christian buildings that are open during the day. They're also usually plonk in the middle of the marketplace of whatever community that they're in. And therefore, I used to always say to people in my last job at Church Army, when they were asking why nobody ever came to their church, I'd say, well, for a lot of people, they would see your church like a private members club, that it's really lovely that it's there, and we hope that everybody who goes has a very nice time, but I'm not a member, so I don't go. A cathedral might just be seen by wider society as a public place, a place you can go in. We're not going to get jumped on. You're not going to be asked to sign anything or give anything. You can just go in and be. And I suspect as we come through the next number of months and years, that place to just be is going to become really important. And I would want to encourage cathedrals to find ways to facilitate that, and to help people find easy ways to discover faith in an accessible way and in a generous way, to help them come to terms with what they've been facing in their lives.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I absolutely agree with that, Mark.
Thank you. Now, just turning back to the justice question, we had a contributor say, if you're going to talk about race, why aren't there any ethnic minority faces on the screen tonight? The reason is we chose people to talk about social justice tonight. If there is another webinar, you'll find a panel comprised of people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and the conference is very, very well stocked with contributors from Black and non-white cultures. So let me just assure people of that. The other thing, of course, is that many social justice questions impact hugely on people already disadvantaged through reasons of race and minority culture status. And we will have a very particular contribution to talk about that from Selena. But more of that perhaps at a future event. I just want to give you two, though, the opportunity, Mark and Anne, because we're coming to the final kind of furlong, to say a few words of reflection on what you've talked about tonight. And as you're reading the runes at the moment, I mean, Mark's referred to the shenanigans in Downing Street, and an odd political culture, let's put it as politely as that, and one that doesn't sort of inculcate a huge amount of public trust. So who do we follow? Where are we to find truth? And that's, I think, part of a justice question as well, because when there's not much trust around, people are not inclined to be just. But anyway, Anne, do you want to have a go at this from your eyrie in Lambeth Parish Church House? No.
What I'd really like to do is just to throw some challenges into the ring, if that's all right, about the sort of things that we tie ourselves up in knots about, which actually prevent us from engaging fully in social justice issues and therefore not contributing to human flourishing. And to do that, I want to go back to my ARC idea as well. Mm-hmm. Too many times I see people arguing over the measurements and forgetting to put any pitch on their boat. So there's a big argument about, it's not that many cubits. Oh no, we have to have this sort of measurement. No, your measuring rod is wrong. So it's all about numbers and all about getting the numbers right. And somebody is forgetting that somehow we have to weatherproof the whole thing if it's to last into the future, if it's going to be there for the people that need it, for all the people that Mark's been talking about, all the children who need a proper childhood and to engage in the world in the way that they can properly flourish. To do that, we have to follow what God has asked us to do, instead of just getting hung up on one bit of it. And that's part of the problem. So that's one challenge that I see inhibits our understanding of and contribution to social justice. Another one is trying to stuff dinosaurs into the ark. Trying to, well, we do that an awful lot as well. And that worries me, because we spend a lot of time on that without realizing that the dinosaurs are really dead and gone. We need to be prophetic, not trying to deal with the past in that sort of way. Another problem, it seems to me, is woodworm and leakage. There are holes everywhere, and we're not paying attention to how we actually have something that is fit for purpose for social justice. I mean, we're not paying that proper attention. We're getting hung up on other things. And to go with that, I'm afraid, from my point of view, a lot of the time we pretend it's not raining, but it is raining. I have had thousands and thousands of spiritual inquiries about COVID, with people who are not Christians, who don't have any faith, but they want to know what God is doing, and they want an answer from someone. And what they're getting is answers saying it's not really raining, but it is raining. And then keeping out some creatures in favor of others, or not feeding the creatures that we've got, or mucking them out. Say, we've got the creatures, that's fine. That's the end of social justice. It's not. We have to make sure people have their basic needs actually offered to them, and that they can take advantage of them, that they can actually get them. And we have to get our hands dirty. We can't just pretend that if we throw a few things in people's directions, they'll sort it out for themselves. They won't. We've got to be alongside them for the long haul, to use Mark's phrase. That's a very good phrase, for the long haul. And finally, that we ignore the potential of the ark after the rain. And that's where we're being short-sighted about what the church can offer, what cathedrals can offer in their communities, and what God is urgently asking of us. And all of those things impact social justice.
Thank you.
Just reflecting on the comments around racism and exclusion, can I just say that Black young people and UKME young people are more likely to live in poor housing. They're more likely to live in poverty. They're more likely to be excluded from school. They're more likely to have a bad experience with the justice system. They're more likely to end up in jail, and more likely to end up unemployed. So we have a massive job to do to advocate for transformation for young people from Black and UKME backgrounds, to ensure that they get a fairer, more just deal in the future. I really like what Joe Hawes has put into the chat box, that cathedrals mustn't just struggle to survive, but also be places where they connect with social justice, not just surviving as an end in itself, but regrouping to serve and connect. And I want to really finish with a reflection from one of my favorite writers, who's a feminist writer who writes in The Guardian, called Rebecca Solnit, who said that, and I used to think I was an optimist. She said, I discovered optimists and pessimists have one thing in common. They both believe they don't have to do anything at all. The optimist doesn't do anything because everything will always get better, and the pessimist doesn't do anything because it'll all get worse. Solnit argues that the world is only ever changed by hope-filled people. Hope-filled people who dare to believe that their time, their money, their voice, their actions, and their heart can affect change in the world. Now, I've never heard a better definition of what the kingdom of God should be about. Hope-filled people who have a vision of a different world and who work tirelessly to make it a reality. As Hugh Lee said in the comments as well, to involve the vast numbers of people who come through the doors of cathedrals, to become a movement, to fight for that world, to fight for hope, and to fight for transformation. And when we do that, then we really will see change, and we will see a fairer world and more justice. And I think we'll see the world that God yearns for and intends.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we are now virtually at the end of our allotted time. I just want to thank our contributors very much indeed for joining us. And for those of you who are out there who are attached to cathedral communities in any way, and you know your cathedral hasn't yet booked to come to the National Cathedrals Conference, do urge them to come along. And also you can act as a really good audience for debriefing and say, okay, what went on at Newcastle? Tell us what you learnt and what we're going to do about it. It's as simple as that. I do know cathedral communities can be amazingly supportive of just the carrying on and being there. We have fantastic numbers of volunteers involved with our cathedrals. Here in Little Lichfield, 500 people are signed up to do various wonderful acts. And we touch an amazing number of lives. Over 200,000 people come through the doors every year. And so to give signs of hope, to say that we're alongside, to say that we are concerned, that we receive the prayers and hopes of the world and want to do something about it, is a very significant ministry. So I'm hoping that as many people as possible from the cathedral sector will come and get recharged at Newcastle and think some new thoughts, get provoked, and can inspire others in that search for God's justice and God's reconciliation in the world. We have got a fantastic platform as English cathedrals, and I think it's my ambition as chairman of the Association of English Cathedrals to see that voice well raised on behalf of the people it needs to be raised on behalf of. So thank you everyone, the 500 of you who've signed up for tonight's webinar, and I hope that you'll feel empowered to discuss these issues, not only in cathedrals, but wherever you happen to be in the church. I want to thank very much the Church Times for hosting this and for giving us so much airtime. It's been an amazingly generous gift from you. So thank you all very much indeed. And on that note, I just want to say thanks again for being with us, and let's keep thinking and praying and grumbling for justice. Thank you all.